Well, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has been pushing together what he's calling a coalition of the willing to back Ukraine. That's after Donald Trump's White House clash with Volodymyr Zelenskyy put U.S. support in doubt. Here to bring us the view from Washington, D.C. is Julia Manchester, political reporter with The Hill. Good morning to you, Julia, where you are. Now, the dust is not even settling from this extraordinary confrontation between Zelenskyy and Team Trump, if you saw it that way. But there's been a swift reaction in Europe, in particular leaders pledging their support to Kiev. And now we're seeing that there's this coalition of the willing that is making a proposal of a peace plan that they will present to the Trump administration. Was this what the Trump administration was expecting to have, and how might they react to a peace proposal that's not theirs?
Well, look, I mean, I think this is no surprise to the Trump administration. I think they knew that a number of European countries would, publicly back Ukraine. We know that, from the Trump administration's perspective, look, they say they want to do things on their terms. For them, it was, more of, having to do with this minerals deal that had been, for the U.S. to access a lot of these rare earth minerals, in exchange for security in Ukraine. That was really the gist, or kind of the root of the, what we saw the blow up happen in the Oval Office. So in terms of the peace plan presented by Europe, it's unclear whether the Trump administration would agree to it, because I don't think it necessarily touches the main root of the problem between Washington and Kyiv right now, and that's that minerals deal.
Yes, I mean, on that, Zelenskyy did say that this minerals deal and the relations with Washington and the Trump administration can be salvaged. Will that statement work in any way to pacify Donald Trump and J.D. Vance?
It's really unclear right now. I mean, look, we saw, some of Volodymyr Zelenskyy's staunchest supporters here in Washington on the Republican side of the aisle following that meeting essentially say that the Oval Office meeting was a disaster for Zelenskyy, that he didn't come into it, in their words, being diplomatic enough with Trump. And we saw Lindsey Graham, for example, a senator from South Carolina, someone who's very closely allied with Zelenskyy, say, he's got to ultimately step down, or something else has got to change. So I don't really see how this deal with Europe ultimately, and that statement from Zelenskyy, ultimately changes anything from Trump's perspective.
Julia, on the domestic front, how has the war in Ukraine, in the context of the billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars that the U.S. has committed to it, is that now emerging with the Trump administration, emerging as a divisive issue beyond Congress?
In Congress, yes. And, within political circles here in the U.S., absolutely. I mean, within the Democrats, staunchly pro-Ukraine. You have a number of Republicans who are also very pro-Ukraine. But you also have a lot of Republicans, and there's a split within the party that would say that they are America first, and that, this flow of money and resources going to Ukraine sort of gets in the way of that America First agenda. But beyond Washington, beyond Congress, I would say that this issue, even though it's certainly a top story here in the United States, for American voters, I don't think it's necessarily top of mind the same way domestic issues are. You have to remember, we're still dealing with very high inflation here in the United States. You have the Trump administration seeking to really come in and cut down the size of the federal government. That's impacting, news here back at home. So I don't know if it's necessarily hitting U.S. voters the same way it is maybe in political circles.
Yes. And of course, Donald Trump, President, he has got an official invitation by the royal family to visit the UK. Do you think he's going to head across the Atlantic anytime soon? And how might he be received when he gets there? Might things get frosty? But given as well that the U.S.'s NATO allies in Europe do need America's continued support in the context of a very aggressive Russia?
Well, I think it was very smart of Prime Minister Starmer to invite Donald Trump, take that invitation with from King Charles to Donald Trump. We know that Donald Trump loves the idea of the royal family. He likes the pageantry and the pomp, in the UK. So he likes, being flattered that way. So I would, at some point, we're not sure when, he will go across, the Atlantic to, do that visit. But I think it's an opportunity for the UK and European allies to essentially launch a charm offensive on Donald Trump, because he will, appreciate that.
And Julia, I wanted to just go back to that explosive clash at the White House. And there was that notorious question about Zelenskyy not wearing a suit. And that came from the reporter Brian Glenn, the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene, a strong supporter of Donald Trump in Congress. But there was also even a Russian reporter present. What's happening at the press gallery when we're seeing sort of long-established institutions being kicked out?
This has to deal with now the White House, the Trump administration deciding who gets to go into the pool. Obviously, the Oval Office is only so big enough to accommodate so many reporters, and that's why you have the pool of reporters that are selected to go in there. The pool of reporters, outside of the Oval Office that will, send dispatches from traveling with the president, et cetera. Normally, the White House Correspondents Association, which is separate from the administration itself, determines who gets into the pool on a rotating basis. But reporter Marjorie Taylor Greene's alleged boyfriend and the Russian state media reporter, those would have had, at least, I can't speak for the Russian reporter, but for Brian Glenn, he would have had to go around, essentially was selected by the White House itself, not the Correspondents Association. So that's a result of that.
And do you think that is impacting the work that you and many others of your peers there are doing?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, if we're not being chosen to be in the pool, yes. We'll see if it impacts the work. I mean, it's very early on, but I think it's certainly impacting the coverage.
Okay, Julian Manchester, always good to get your insights from Washington, D.C., and appreciate once again you getting up so early to speak with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.